Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first, graphic here, hazardous weather graphic. There's a winter weather advisory out there for the Upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country area, and that's out until 2 a.m. Monday morning, and looking for 2 to 6 inches of snow to fall along the Alaska Highway, with the heaviest amounts falling from Dot Lake to Tanacross, again along the Alaska Highway, and that's out until 2 a.m. Monday morning. And also a winter weather advisory continues for snow over the northern panhandle there, Klondike-Haines Highway areas, and taking a little closer look at that. That's out until 10 p.m. tonight, this evening, and Klondike Highway until 10 p.m. Sunday night. Well, that's this evening as well. And for additional snow on the Haines Highway, 2 to 6 inches, highest near the border. And for the Klondike Highway, 3 to 6 inches, and that's above the 1,500-foot level. And of course, that could create some hazardous driving conditions. But you can see on the map there, Haines Customs looking at additional 4 to 6 inches possible tonight or this evening, with 2 to 3 inches. Chilkat River Bridge. But Skagway only looking for less than an inch, but up toward White Pass you can see 4 to 6 inches. And then the Haines Airport significantly less, also more like Skagway, less than an inch there. And so from there, going into satellite imagery, low pressure there brought some strong winds, another trough swinging in, had pretty strong winds on the south coast of the Panhandle today, with another round of rain changing to showers there over the central and southern southeast coast as that one band of solid clouds lifts over the northern Panhandle, and the main low center staying south of Yakutat there, and that pulling down cold air out of the northwest into the western Gulf of Alaska, across the southwest interior, right across Kodiak Island, Kamishak Bay areas, and some pretty gusty winds along the southwest coast as well, up towards 50 miles an hour at Cape Newenham, Cape Romanzoff earlier today. Otherwise, snow showers continue to fall over the Alaska Peninsula and to a lesser extent over the Pribilof Islands. And then farther to the west, you can see the clouds associated with the next system, not all that strong, but the frontal boundary there northwest of the Shimia, and some moisture spreading eastward there, with the front bringing some rain in toward the far western Aleutians. Then you can see on the lower left of the screen there, that's next cirrus shield associated with a warm front and another system that will be tracking northeastward as well. And the low there over the Russian Far East, that'll be moving slowly over towards St. Matthew Island over the next couple of days. Otherwise, clouds dropping southwestwards, making for kind of a mostly cloudy day over the Susitna Valley, Manduska-Susitna Valley into northern Cook Inlet after a sunnier start today, but it looks like some breaks over the Copper River Basin, as well as up over the just south of the Brooks Range there, and the eastern Arctic coast as well, seeing some breaks, but clouds and up to an inch of snow falling on the central Arctic coast during the day today. And on the chart, winds diminishing over the Alaska Peninsula, still pretty gusty though this afternoon, but coming down. Kodiak State Airport had a gust around 50 miles an hour, and north winds to 50 miles an hour in gusts also at Seward today. And Augustine Island, northwest, 60 mile per hour wind gusts. Even stronger winds recorded on the coast of the Panhandle, Cape Decision, 74 miles per hour for peak wind gusts there. And Port Alexander, 53 miles per hour, and close to 50 mile an hour wind gusts earlier today at Juneau, with rainfall amounts ranging from a little less than an inch at Wrangell, 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m. this afternoon. And both Juneau and Klawock picked up about 3/4 of an inch of rain again today. And up in the interior there, about an inch of snow fell at Delta Junction today, with areas of light snow and snow showers along the Alaska Range and into the northeast Kuskokwim Valley down to the western Alaska Range. And then the mostly clear skies, but some clouds dropping southwestward into northern Cook Inlet today in the Susitna Valley. Otherwise, next system spreading warm front rains in toward the central Aleutians. For tonight, that'll continue to push in toward the Pribilofs. Look for increasing moisture and winds becoming more south and southwest, so that's going to bring warmer temperatures in. So it might start out as snow, but should change right over to rain once it gets going. And improving, though, for the Fox Islands. Winds continue to diminish, as well as the snow showers taper off for the Alaska Peninsula. Stays quite windy over Kodiak Island tonight, with storm warnings in the Kamishak Bay, Barren Island areas. And windy for southern Cook Inlet as well. But dry conditions and variably cloudy skies, maybe some snow showers in the eastern Madanuska Valley up toward Eureka and into the Copper River Basin, and of course with snow advisories out until 2 a.m. there for the 40-mile country. But areas of light snow or snow flurries or snow showers over much of the central interior, especially along the west coast there, and that same sort of pattern on the western Arctic coast with that weak low just west of Wainwright. And periods of rain continue over the Panhandle and for tomorrow. Still pretty unsettled, another trough, that low slowly weakening, but continuing to send surges of moisture into the southeast coast. But it'll be lighter, and winds will be much lighter as compared to what you've seen the last 24 hours. Stays pretty breezy over the Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island area, especially in the channeled areas. So another windy day coming up. Probably won't see the wind gusts you saw today in Resurrection Bay. Rain and warmer temperatures sliding up into the eastern Aleutians, as well as the Pribilofs, with a low, with the main front up over the Bering Sea and that low tracking eastward. Then the next system coming onto the chart south of Adak, and that low to the south there will track eastward faster than the one to the north because it's forming just north of the main jet, and that'll carry it up to the northeast, as you can see on Tuesday. That tracks right up to the Alaska Peninsula with rain and some gusty winds in advance of the front, spreading into Kodiak Island during the afternoon hours, and Bristol Bay, and areas of snow making its way into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, or southwestern Yukon Delta, and into the Kuskokwim Delta, with mostly dry and cold conditions continuing from the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet area right up to the eastern Arctic coast. Still a chance of snow showers or light snow for the western Arctic coast with that low off to over the Chukchi Sea. And could be some flurries and snow showers persisting there, especially in the upslope areas would be the north side of the Alaska Range into the Wrangell Mountains, but amounts will be on the light side, and still some isolated showers. That low really weakening now. It could result in a pretty dry day for the southeast coast, maybe even a few sun breaks. And looking at the lows for tonight over the Panhandle, in the mid to upper 30s, near 30 for the North Gulf Coast, and Cordova, Prince William Sound, mid-20s, teens for the inland areas of southern Alaska. A little warmer tonight for Gull Canada after that, I think it was 15 below this morning, be 3 above tomorrow morning. And anywhere right around 10 for the Kuskokwim Valley, and upper teens for Bristol Bay. And then highs for Bristol Bay tomorrow, upper 20s, lower 30s, near 20 in the Kuskokwim Valley, mid-teens Copper River Basin, 20s south central Alaska, upper 30s Kodiak Island, and lower 40s for the southeast coast, followed by hot lows the next morning, Tuesday morning, upper 20s to mid-30s for the Panhandle, back below zero in the Copper River Basin, a shade above zero in the Kuskokwim Valley, upper 20s Kodiak, and 5 to 15 south central Alaska, followed by highs near 20 in the Susitna Valley, lower 20s for south central Alaska, 33 for Nome, lower 40s Kodiak Island, southern Panhandle, lower 30s for Bristol Bay. Up to the north, lows 5 to 15 below for the northeast interior, otherwise single numbers in teens. And that'll be followed by highs coldest over the northeast interior, right around zero either side, 10 to 15 eastern Tanana Valley, and near 5 over the eastern interior, mid-20s out toward the Bering Strait. Lows colder coming in Tuesday morning, 15 to 20 below for the Yukon Flats, up toward Arctic Village in those areas, and below zero for the mid and upper Tanana Valley. And in the teens, single numbers and teens elsewhere, highs right around zero for the Yukon Flats, and 5 to 10 for the eastern interior, to upper 20s around Nome. And then out to the southwest, lows tonight, lower to mid-20s for the southwest coast, near 30 for the Pribilofs, upper 30s for the Aleutians, lower to mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula. Highs tomorrow near freezing for St. Lawrence Island, the southwest coast. Lower 40s elsewhere, except upper 40s for AKwx. Followed by lows in the mid-20s along the southwest coast and lower to mid-teens Bristol Bay. Mid to upper 30s Alaska Peninsula. Mid-30s for the central and western Aleutians. Followed by highs 45 to 50 Alaska Peninsula and the Fox Islands. Lower 40s for the Pribilofs.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving into flying weather, we've got good VFR for the Arctic coast, north slope across the Brooks Range down to south of the Yukon River, then some marginal VFR into the Kuskokwim Valley, lower Yukon River Valley, and some IFR for the Seward Peninsula. Also for the Noatak Valley, but marginal VFR across the Alaska Range down into the Wrangell Mountains and northward to the Yukon Flats, and mostly VFR for southern Alaska, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR for the Panhandle, IFR over toward the border and up toward Lynn Canal, and marginal VFR for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And for the afternoon, pretty good VFR again in the interior, but marginal VFR out toward the west coast area, and also marginal VFR lingering along the Alaska Range down into the Wrangell Mountains to the eastern North Gulf Coast in a narrow band there from about Cape St. Elias to west of Yakutat. Yakutat in toward Elfin Cove VFR began mostly marginal for the southeast coast, and the central eastern Bering Sea mostly marginal VFR. A couple of zones of IFR, one south of St. Lawrence Island and the other one over Atka and Adak. And for Tuesday morning, frontal system pushes IFR from St. Lawrence Island southward across the Pribilofs right up to Nunivak Island and the Yukon Delta coast, and that extends southward to the eastern Aleutians, western Alaska Peninsula, and some IFR there over the southwest interior, marginal VFR up along the west coast to the western Arctic coast, mostly VFR southern Alaska, but still that lower area there over the eastern Copper River Basin, now IFR up to the eastern Alaska Range, but north of the mountains there, VFR all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, and increasing VFR for the Panhandle. And then for Tuesday afternoon, Kodiak Island goes from VFR early on to IFR by late afternoon as that front pushes east-northeastward, IFR and across Bristol Bay, Togiak Bay, up into the southwest interior, and then the southern Kuskokwim Valley, Yukon Delta, or southern Kuskokwim Delta, Yukon Delta looks pretty good. Mostly VFR over interior Alaska, eastern Arctic coast up over the northwest, with increasing VFR also for the central Aleutians out west to about Chimay-Attu. Southern Panhandle, VFR, northern areas, marginal VFR, eastern North Gulf Coast, same thing, with some IFR lingering Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay northward, or the northern areas there, and maybe some over the Copper River Basin. And Atuvik, VFR tomorrow. For Monday, good VFR again for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill could start out marginal, becoming VFR. Rainy, probably marginal VFR at times throughout the entire day. Rainy, marginal VFR. And Isabel looking marginal as well as Mintasta, marginal VFR. And for Tanita, though, VFR. And Portage also looking pretty good, VFR flying conditions there. Chilkoot and White, a little bit of an improvement, but holding on to marginal VFR. And the freezing levels, 2,000 feet along the southeast coast and the Aleutians, otherwise at the surface now, as the warmer air gets suppressed southward. At the surface, north of the Pribilof, south of St. Matthew Island, hugging the North Gulf Coast. Icing, one batch in over the southeast interior and the Panhandle, light to isolated moderate rime icing there. And then next area with that system moving eastward and northeastward, and then the other system down toward the Aleutians. So widespread area of isolated moderate rime icing, Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, Pribilof Islands, much of the eastern and southern Bering Sea up to St. Lawrence Island. And for the jet stream, you can see good west-southwest flow, actually mostly westerly, across the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, pushing that moisture eastward, taking a dive to the northwest, 140 knots across Kodiak Island. Gulf of Alaska, Panhandle, much of interior Alaska, pretty light winds at this elevation, coming down to 9,000 feet. Northwest, 55 knots there from the Aleutian Range across Kodiak Island. and westerlies 55 knots just south of the central Aleutian areas. And at 3,000 feet, that low over the northwest Bering Sea brings 45 knot winds in toward Nunivak Island and 40 knot winds across the Pribilofs. Otherwise, northwest 55 knots, Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands, Fognak Island. And looking at turbulence, considerable moderate chop, Kodiak Island, southern Cook Inlet, as well as the Susitna Valley and the eastern and central Aleutians and St. Lawrence Island.
Just as the sun is part of weather on Earth, it also affects weather in space. The sun creates solar wind by steadily releasing a flow of plasma particles in all directions around it. Sometimes the sun gives off a flash of light and X-rays. This is known as a solar flare. When massive bursts of particles explode into space, we call it a coronal mass ejection, or CME. When a CME is directed toward Earth, it hits the magnetosphere, the magnetic field around our planet that protects us. If the storm is large, we may even get to enjoy a light display in the sky called the auroras. In space, satellites may be damaged, and astronauts should take cover. On Earth, people do not feel any physical effects. We may lose electricity in some areas, polar flights may be rerouted, and satellite services may be disrupted. While these situations aren't ideal, they are rare and fixable. This is why we will continue to study the sun and its interactions with Earth and the solar system.
Longing for more space, open skies, and exotic travel? Then look up, about 30 to 600 miles straight up at the ionosphere, Earth's interface to space. Nestled far above the clouds but below outer space, this little understood destination invites you to explore its many features. Experience both the weather from Earth and the weather from space. Marvel at the ballet of radio waves and navigation signals, like GPS, leaping through this particle paradise. Sit back, relax, and take in the aurora, some satellites, and the International Space Station as they sail by. And you'll want your camera handy for one of the region's signature features, bright and colorful air glow. This daily show is made possible by the ionosphere's own swirling charged particles, because that's what the ionosphere is. It's all charged particles. During the day, enjoy the sea of particles, freshly energized by the sun. As the sun sets, this particle party relaxes and the air glow thins. Our quieter nightlife lets you gaze into clearer skies. The ionosphere is in constant motion, an amazing effect of space weather. Don't miss when solar storms rain down. The storm separates the particles even more, making this colorful region delightfully more dense in some places and stunningly sparse in others. And don't forget about storms from Earth below. Your weather from back home also stirs up this one-of-a-kind destination. Experience the unique beauty of every season, as changes in Earth's atmosphere, daily and annually, can create pressure waves, changing the ionosphere's shape and density. Venture to the equator, where our particles are packed in lush and thick. Cruise along a magnetic field line and see how the ionosphere's charged material also interacts with Earth's own magnetic field. Don't miss the superhighway of particles zipping out to space and back down to the planet. This unpredictable parade of charged particles can help you unplug and unwind. This is because the crowd of particles can garble the radio and satellite communications from home. The ionosphere welcomes you to discover more about this little-known region. After all, once you've explored this interface to space, who knows how much farther you'll be able to go.
When a star, bigger and more massive than the Sun, runs out of fuel at the end of its life, its core collapses while the outer layers are blown off in a supernova explosion. What's left behind depends on the star's original mass. A star roughly 10 to 20 times our Sun leaves behind a neutron star. A more massive star becomes a black hole. Unlike black holes, neutron stars are directly observable, usually as pulsars, the lighthouses of the cosmos. Discovered 50 years ago, they are the densest observable objects in the universe. Neutron stars compress up to twice the Sun's mass into a city-sized sphere. Matter is packed so tightly that a teaspoon of neutron star interior would weigh more than 1 billion tons on Earth. Still, the nature of the ultra-dense matter in the cores of neutron stars is unknown. Because neutron stars pack so much mass into such a tiny volume, they produce gravity strong enough to bend the light they emit, distorting their appearance in a way that enables the mass and size of the star to be measured. Scientists cannot reproduce the extreme conditions in and around neutron stars on Earth. They must look into the galaxy to answer decades-old questions about extreme matter and gravity. NASA's Neutron Star Interior Composition Explorer mission, or NISA, will make X-ray observations of neutron stars from its perch on the International Space Station. It will give astronomers more insight into these mysterious objects, helping determine what is under their surface. A multi-purpose mission, NISA includes a technology demonstration called Sextant. It will analyze NISA's observations to validate the use of rapidly rotating neutron stars as navigation beacons for travel in deep space throughout the solar system and beyond.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at marine forecasts on the south coast, Panhandle tomorrow, west to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, and then south to east winds on the north coast at 20 knots, seas running 13 to 18 feet. And for Lynn Canal, southeast winds 15 knots, but gale warnings for Stevens Passage, southeast winds 35 knots, and then Clarence Strait back down to 15 knots from the southeast. And for the day Tuesday, central southern inner channels, northeast winds at 10 knots, pretty light with seas down there 2 to 3 feet, and northwest at 20 for Lynn Canal with 4-foot seas, and on the south coast, east-northeasterlies 15 to 20 knots, and for the north coast, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Prince William Sound tomorrow, pretty stiff northeast wind sustained at 30 knots with seas up to 6 feet, and North Gulf Coast, north winds 25 to 35 knots, and gale warnings for the Barren Islands. Northwest winds 45 knots. Storm warnings for Kamishak Bay continue for northwest winds at 50 knots, and for Cook Inlet, winds will be north to northwest at 20 knots. And for Tuesday, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet, east-northeast winds 30 knots for the North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands. Northeast winds 25 knots for southern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay. Northern Cook Inlet looking at a north wind at 20 knots. And for Monday, Kodiak Island, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 to 45 knots with storm force gusts to 50 knots. Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest 20 to 25 knots. Bristol Bay, northwest at 30 knots. And for Tuesday, Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisory, southwest winds 30 knots, seas 10 feet. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay, winds out of the east at 35 knots. And for Kodiak Island, small craft advisory, southeast winds 25 knots, seas at 9 feet. Eastern Aleutians for Monday, south to southeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. And for the central Aleutians, winds will be east-southeast 25 to 30 knots. And for the western Aleutians, look for northerly winds at 25 knots with 10-foot seas. And for Tuesday, western Aleutians, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Central Aleutians, west-northwest at 25 knots. And eastern Aleutians, mostly west winds at 25 knots. For the Yukon Delta coast, for Monday, southeast winds 25 knots. Southeast 30-knot winds in the forecast for St. Lawrence Island, and 30-knot winds from the south for St. Matthew Island, St. Paul and St. George, forecasting a south wind at 25 knots. Kuskokwim Delta Coast, lighter winds in store for that area, out of the west at 15. And then for Tuesday, gale warnings for the southwest coast, east winds 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings also out for St. Lawrence Island for east winds at 35 knots. And another gale warning for St. Matthew Island, northeast winds 35 knots, 12-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the Pribilofs, northwest winds 25 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast on Monday, east winds at 20 knots, seas in ice-free waters there, 5 feet. And for the central Arctic coast, southeast at 25, good for small craft advisories, seas up to 7 feet. And the western Arctic coast, south winds at 20 knots. For the Chukchi Sea, west winds 20 to 25 knots, seas 8 to 9 feet. And for Tuesday, lighter winds there, east for the Chukchi Sea, 15 knots, western Arctic coast, southwest at 15 knots, southeast 15 for the central coast, and east to southeast winds at 20 to 25 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And again, those seas in the diminishing ice-free water area over that way at about 3 feet. And for tonight, mostly clear and cold for the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast. Areas of snow over the interior with the winter weather advisory out for the 40-mile country, Alaska Highway, Dot Lake to Tanacross. Could see 3 to 6 inches of snow. Otherwise, variably cloudy and windy. Kodiak Island, south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast. Periods of rain continue for the Panhandle. And the next front spreads rain into the Pribilofs with warmer temperatures, and another system spreads rain up into the eastern Aleutians there, the one south of Adak. Drier over the interior, lingering snow showers over the Alaska range, still quite windy for Kodiak, but winds diminishing all across that area. Unsettled for the Panhandle, and dry day for the southeast coast Tuesday possibly. Flurries over the southeast interior. Next system brings rain and snow to the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island. And that's all I've got time for. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.